Gentlemen, the jury.
Thank you for standing, folks. Please be seated.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. McAllen.
Okay, so as I was noting before the break, it's the state's burden to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. Stephen doesn't have to prove that he was justified. They have to prove that he wasn't. Now, if you look at instruction 34, this is a pretty important instruction for you as to justification, because it points out that Stephen is justified in threatening or using physical force, even deadly physical force, to try and prevent another from committing an aggravated assault. An aggravated assault can come from just seriously physically injuring someone, okay? Beating someone up can be an aggravated assault. Okay? Now, there's no duty to retreat. It's right there in the second paragraph. There's no requirement that the defendant's safety, that there's any threat to the defendant's safety before he acts here. You see that third paragraph, he's allowed to use this force not just at his home, place of business, but any place in this state where he has a right to be. And he had every bit of right to be in that parking lot as the guys that were attacking him did. He had every right to walk up to that corner. There's nothing in the law that says he wasn't allowed to brandish that gun and go up to them. He has every right to be there. And he's justified in using that force if he's trying to prevent the attack, which is exactly what he was trying to do. You know, he thought that when he went up there, they would recognize they need to leave these guys alone and leave, go back to their party at the courtyard. He didn't know that these guys were that brazen, they were going to attack him, not just once, but twice. Now, I mentioned earlier about perceptions. There's a lot of different perceptions here. Some people only saw bits and pieces. Some people told you they were in shock or tunnel vision. There is no one person that saw everything. We have this Leica scan that's given this great sort of view from all different angles. No one had that kind of view. Okay? So we have to piece it together. Rather, you have to piece it together. And it's important to recognize the various vantage points and perceptions that people have. As many told you, they were under shock or tunnel vision. The adrenaline's going to affect their perception. Many were under the influence of alcohol. That's going to affect their perception. And there's a difference between imperfect memory and not being honest. For example, if we can pull up Exhibit 482, please. Now, you may recall this exhibit from Nick Prado's testimony. This is the diagram that he drew for the police close in time to when all of this happened. Okay. And you might recall, he circled where he thought the shooting happened. And he circled the wrong end of the parking lot. It doesn't mean he's lying. That's just how his memory was at the time. In his mind, for whatever reason, the adrenaline, the alcohol, whatever reason, he thought the shooting happened right there. And he put himself on that corner very close to the shooting, but that's why he's saying he's there at the entrance of the driveway. Now we know if he was actually much closer to the shooting, but the shooting was down in that corner. He wasn't at the end of the driveway like he's claiming. But that's his perception at the time, that he's in the corner. Okay? And interestingly, go to Exhibit 74. It's not a Google map, but it's the same misperception. Stephen, in his mind, and he told the police this over and over again, in his mind, the shooting happened at that corner, near Franklin Street, the same place Prado thought it happened. Now, we all know that it actually happened at the other corner, but both of these witnesses on both sides of this had that same misperception that it happened in that corner. And that's the tricky thing with memory, is that it doesn't mean that anyone's lying in this instance. It's just because of the circumstances, the chaos of the moment, the adrenaline, in Prado's case, the alcohol, they misperceived. Doesn't mean they're lying, it's just misperceptions. And it's important to keep that in mind as you go through all this evidence. Now, if we can go to exhibits 442 to 447. As we walk through this scene, we'll use the Leica scan that we've grown so accustomed to. But I think it's very important for all of you to keep in mind that it wasn't that bright. It's very difficult when we're looking at that Leica scan to keep that in mind. So that's why I'm showing you these photos, because these are the photos that the police took at the time. Yeah, this is the view looking down. Go back to the first one. Okay. This is the view of that corner from the edge, from the corner that we just looked in that diagram, where Nick Prado, Stephen Jones thought the shooting happened in that corner. We know it was the other corner. This is that corner, looking at the corner where it really happened. And you can see just how dark it is. We've had testimony from many witnesses who claim they were across the street and clearly could see things. This is actually in the parking lot, and you still can't see the other corner. So next one, please. And this is on the sidewalk in that same area. This is where the boulders are at the beginning of the entrance into that parking lot, looking down at the corner. You can't even see the tree down there. Maybe make out a shadow of it. It's very dark. Next one, please. This is the same area on that sidewalk, a little bit closer to the parking lot, looking at that corner. This is where a lot of the guys claimed they were when they saw everything so clearly. Many of them claimed they were even further back than that, when they claimed they could see so clearly what happened down there. It's just not credible. Next one, please. Now this is Franklin Street. This is looking down Franklin Street, and we can kind of make out that the courtyard's on the side. We could see there's the unit that Bruin, Peering, and Mullen shared. This is how dark it was on Franklin when this group came out and attacked Stephen and his friends. That's all we have for the nighttime photos. But keep that in mind as you're evaluating this, and we'll switch over to 316 now. Great, thanks. If we could start over on the Franklin view. Thanks. I mean, look, just looking at that, it looks a lot safer already, doesn't it? You have to keep in mind how dark it was. But this is, actually, if we could go up to Station 8. And just swing into the middle of the street. No, the other way. Thanks. No. A little bit to the right, please. A little bit more. Thanks. Okay, you see the right end of the screen there. That's the unit that Colin and his friends came out of. Now, we've heard conflicting testimony. Some say that they came from around the courtyard. Others say they came out that door. Doesn't really matter. Either way, they came out onto that dark street and accosted these three freshmen for no good reason. And they pushed them across the street. And if we go now to view 7, please. Just swinging around, looking up Franklin. That's good, thanks. So now Stephen and his friends, just the three of them, are standing in that street, backing up, saying, "We're leaving, we're leaving." And a mob of drunken guys come out of that area from the courtyard and are pursuing Stephen and his friends. And we know that Brew was there. We know that Peering was there. We know that Mullen was there. Acevedo says he was standing back, and Pletke says he was standing back. Neither of them are entirely clear yet if Prado's there or not. But there's a group of them, and Austin is standing in the back as well, getting ready to throw his sucker punch. Stephen and his friends are backing up, and these guys are pursuing them. They were already across the street when Stephen got cracked by Austin. They were already leaving. There was no reason, absolutely no reason to attack them. And when Austin did throw that sucker punch, what did the rest of them do? The rest of the Delta Chi's didn't stop, say, "Whoa, Austin, you're going too far. Back off. Hey, are you okay, kid? Here's your glasses." No, they did quite the opposite. They chased these guys. They weren't done with them. Shay and Stephen and Jacob ran up that drive. If we can turn to see the Mountain View sidewalk. They started to run into that area to leave. And these guys chased them. They weren't done with them. They pushed Shay down, they pushed Jacob down. If at that point they had just left those kids alone, they would have left. Nothing would have happened. But they pursued. They kept up the attack. And based on that, under the circumstances where he's just been punched in the head, cracked, as Austin so eloquently put it, knocked almost to the ground, hits that car. They've got blood on that car from when Stephen was punched. Knocked off his glasses, loosened the bridge in his mouth, and are now chasing him and his friends. It's under those circumstances that he realizes they're in trouble, and he runs to his car. And Jake and Shay run up that sidewalk. And these guys aren't done. They don't stop there, say, "All right, we're done." Even Austin Contreras said, "I'm not going to chase a dude." After throwing the sucker punch, it was apparently too much for him to continue to chase these kids, but not for Brew and Peering and the others. They kept up their pursuit. They kept up their attack. And they chased Shay and Jake all the way down that sidewalk. Now at this point, we're at over 200 feet from when they first started pursuing these kids. 200 feet. State wants to keep making a big deal out of 90 feet. We're already double that, and they're still attacking. I believe it's Station 5 we want to go to next, please. Maybe it's 2. Swing over. Yeah, thanks. So now these guys have chased Jake and Shay, and don't for a second let the state tell you that Jake and Shay weren't concerned. They were concerned. They recognized they were under attack, and they were backing up to get away. Let's look at some of Shay's statements to the police that night. This is after he's had time to calm down and reflect, but still that night when memories are fresh. What did he tell the police? Yeah, he ran away after the shots were fired. That's the prudent thing to do. I'm frankly shocked more of these kids didn't run away. I hope my kids are never in this situation, but if they are, they better do what Shay did and run away. How many of these guys ran in to the scene after shots were fired? It's crazy. They did it because they were drunk, but it's crazy. Shay did the right thing in running away, but that doesn't change what he saw beforehand. He saw Colin lunge at Stephen. He told the police that. And then he talked about when he got pushed down over at the entrance to this walkway and how he got up and realized these people were going to hurt us. He told the police he was terrified. He said he wanted to call the police, but they kept advancing. He didn't even think he could do that. He said they were very aggressive, smelled very drunk, and we know they were. There's no doubt about how drunk these guys were, even though this was just a Thursday gathering. They wanted to hurt us, and they weren't going to let us go. That's what Shay told the police that night. He said possibly very brutally beat us up for no reason. Very brutally beat us up. That's aggravated assault. That's what Shay was afraid of at that moment. And that's what he told the police that night. Don't for a second let this state try to tell you that these boys weren't afraid of the attack they were under by the Delta Chis. So now Stephen comes up to this scene. He has every right to walk up to this scene with his gun. Maybe you don't like that law, but that is the law. He has every right to walk up to that scene and brandish his gun and tell these guys to leave him and his friends alone. And it's reasonable for him to think that they're going to heed that warning and leave. That's what most people do when they see a gun. The state has gone to great lengths to say, oh, they didn't know there was a gun, they didn't know there was a gun. Plenty of guys testified they knew it was a gun. And it doesn't matter, from Stephen's perspective, if Colin knew it was a gun or not. He charged right at Stephen. And at that point, you have to put yourself in Stephen's shoes. Is it reasonable when this guy and his buddy are charging at you downhill? Is it reasonable to not shoot? It's not. No one ever wants to be in that position. But once he's there and they're charging at him, he has no choice. He had absolutely no choice at that point. He waited until the last moment. And we know from the medical examiner, this isn't Stephen's claim, this isn't what anyone else perceived. Okay, this is medical evidence that shows, because of the stippling, that Brew was within 2 feet, no further than 2 feet at the time that Stephen shot. He waited until he felt the Kai, just a friend of theirs, but seemed like he would fit right in, though. Peering clearly told the police that he jumped that bush to calm down Colin, that he was mainly trying to calm down Colin. But he took the stand here and tried to tell you that he jumped after Colin was shot. And frankly, it doesn't matter from Stephen's point of view. That's the point of view that matters. That's the point of view you have to evaluate. He's downhill, and he's got 2 guys charging at him. It doesn't really matter what Peering's thinking at the moment. You know, we heard from Acevedo, that's how we know the direction they pursued them, because Acevedo was very clear. I took him step by step. And he kept saying, yes, these were the guys that were there, and yes, they were pursuing, and yes, Stephen and his friends were backing up, and yes, they were pursuing. All the way through over 200 feet of attack that Acevedo witnessed. And he witnessed Prado throwing a punch. He told you that. That's his brother. But he fortunately decided to tell the truth on a stand and admitted that Prado threw a punch on the sidewalk. So when Prado takes a stand and tells you, oh, Stephen looked me dead in the eye and then shot me, you know not to put too much stock in what Prado says, because he also tried to claim that he wasn't there, that he didn't throw a punch, that he was further back, and that he ran up only after the shooting. He wishes he was Acevedo, that he was just hanging back and ran up after the shooting. But he wasn't. He was part of the fray. He was throwing punches. These guys were so brazen, they kept up their attack. Even after Stephen demonstrated that he would use force to defend himself, they kept up the attack. He put the gun away. He started to give first aid. He said, call 911. And what does Pletke decide to do? He decides to tackle the kid and try to take the gun. And once he acted, putting Stephen in a headlock, his buddies joined in, started punching Stephen, kicking Stephen. One of them's got his arm twisted. That's how brazen these guys were. No one's really talked much about Zach Vopo. To this point, it seems like the only point of his testimony was comedic relief. But it wasn't really funny under these circumstances. But there was one thing he said that was quite telling. They were trying to ask him how far he went from where he was, how far did he go when he ran up. And he said, I wasn't counting my steps, I was trying to save my friends. And that's exactly the same thing with Stephen. He wasn't counting his steps. He thought he went 5 to 10, 15 feet. He wasn't sure. He wasn't counting his steps. Neither was Vopo, which is why he couldn't give you an accurate distance. And these distances, you might recall, from a lot of these witnesses have varied quite a bit. Many of these Delta Chi's have tried to claim that Stephen was yards away when he fired. We know scientifically he was 2 feet or less. But Vopo wasn't counting his steps as he was trying to save his friends, and neither was Stephen. Now, I'm done with 316. Thanks. You heard from the medical examiner. This is the state's own witness. But they're medical examiners. They're not biased in any way. And what did he tell you? Quite unequivocally, that there was stippling on Brew's neck. There is no doubt that Brew was within 2 feet when Stephen shot. Stephen waited until the last moment. Couldn't wait any longer. We also know that he wasn't just 2 feet away. He was leaning forward, charging downhill. And that's important because you have to look at it from Stephen's perception. And from his perception, he's gone up to these guys and they are charging at him downhill, getting very close, leaning forward. These are all aggressive acts. He perceived those acts correctly. He wasn't going to wait until this guy actually tackled him, something they later showed they were quite willing to do. If Stephen had waited any longer at all, he might not be here today. If we could bring out diagram, Exhibit 470, please. You're going to have this. diagram back there with you. This is from the medical examiner. Okay? The medical examiner, yeah, just put it in front there. Yeah, that's good. The medical examiner drew these lines to show the trajectory. It shows you how far Brew is leaning. And you'll be able to take this with you in deliberations and put it at the angle it has to be at for that to line up. It'll show you just how far forward Brew was. And remember, he's on a hill when he does this. It's not flat ground. He's on a hill, going downhill straight at Stephen. Now this diagram has him at 5'7". That's based on the medical examiner's measurement when he's lying down. That's not the same thing as height. But actually, if you look at Exhibit 241, which is his driver's license, that will give you his actual height. Okay. Now, if we can zoom out, when was this license issued? This was issued in March of 2014, so over a year prior. Year and a half, really, prior. And he's 5'10" at this point. We don't know if he's still growing or not. We know he's heavier, because we have his weight. We know he's heavier than this now. But that's his height. Okay? He didn't shrink 3 inches during his junior year. The summer between his sophomore and junior year. He didn't shrink. So he's taller than this diagram, which makes the angle even more forward. The medical examiner also told you there's no significance to his hands and whether there was stippling on his hands. The fact that there's no stippling on his hands doesn't change the fact that he was within 2 feet. He could have his hands out in front of him as he's charging Stephen and not get stippling on him. It doesn't mean he wasn't within 2 feet. He was clearly within 2 feet. But what is significant about his hands, when you look at them, are all the scabs. They want you to believe that Colin was this peaceful guy, never hurt a fly. He's got a lot of scabs consistent with fighting on his hands. And regardless of anything he'd ever done in his past, that night, he clearly wasn't being peaceful. Maybe it's the BAC of .285, although many of his friends testified that he didn't drink any more than usual. So he either usually gets that blitzed, or he was more drunk than usual. Either way, it's extreme intoxication. What did the doctor tell you? For someone who doesn't have experience drinking, once you get up to 3, you're usually passed out. But not Colin. He's raring to go. He's chasing guys over 200 feet. He's charging at guys who have a gun pointed at him. He also had Xanax in his system. The doctor told you about the paradoxical effect of Xanax mixed with alcohol. It's very dangerous. They tell you do not mix Xanax and alcohol. Colin did. And Colin didn't have a prescription for that Xanax. Because if he did, you better believe the state would have shown it to you. They would have said he had a prescription. He was fine. He didn't. Which means, in addition to getting himself up to a .285 on a gathering on a Thursday, he's abusing prescription drugs. Unfortunately, that made him very aggressive, and it made him make poor decisions to charge at Stephen downhill. And who knows what other poor decisions he would have made if Steven didn't act to stop him when he did. We also heard from the ER doctor that Zintek's wounds were an upward trajectory. And I showed you earlier about where Zintek actually was when he was shot. The state tried to gloss over that. They had Zintek testify that he only went a couple feet before he dropped, which makes no sense because we know exactly where he was from the blood splatter. We have the trail that he ran. We know he covered way more than 2 feet. He ran down that whole sidewalk after he was shot. And he was south of where Colin was shot, closer to the trees, and very close to where Steven was tackled. And he told the police that he was running towards Steven to get his gun. He was going to be part of the group that were pummeling Steven to try and get his gun. That's why Steven had to act. He did not have any time to wait for Zintek and whoever else was going to pile on top of him and take that gun. And then who knows what happened next. So he did what he could. The only thing he could do in that moment was pull out the gun and try to shoot in the air to get the crowd to disperse. Unfortunately, for Nick Prado and Kyle Zintek, he was still being tackled when those shots went off. But they were still upward shots. He was laying on the ground. Prado was standing above him. Zintek was standing and turning. And that's why he has an upward trajectory in his injury. It's consistent with Steven pointing up in the air as he shoots. Which, of course, we also know from the witness, Ms. Conrad. Another witness the state didn't want you to hear about. And, of course, there's also the tree over in that same area where Kyle is that was shot, consistent with an upward trajectory. And then there are the missing bullets, 2 of them. So we know 1 hit the tree and 7 hit the individuals. So there's 2 more bullets that are missing, consistent with being shot in the air. So who knows where those bullets are now. If he was aiming at people and shooting, if he was aiming at people, they would have found those bullets. But he wasn't aiming at people. He was just trying to get this group off of him. As I said at the beginning, you don't need a weapon in your hand to be a threat to someone's life. Colin Brew, the moment that he decided to charge at Steven, was a threat to Steven's life. It was 2-on-1, charging downhill. Steven is on asphalt. If they get to him, they could kill him. That's a lethal threat. We don't have to speculate about what would happen. If it's within the realm of possibility, it's a lethal threat. And given how aggressive these guys were, it's certainly in the realm of possibility. Ask yourself, would you want to take a chance on letting these guys tackle you and get that gun?
Objection, improper argument.
That's, well,
Overruled.
that's the viewpoint that you have to look at this case from. What would you do if you were standing there and these guys were charging at you?
Same objection, Judge.
Overruled.
He had no choice at that point. He couldn't turn and run. They would tackle him at that point. And he had every right to be there at that moment. You're not deciding whether it was wise for him to leave the car. He had every right to leave that car and walk up to that scene. Instruction 34, he had every right to be there. He doesn't have a duty to retreat. He had every right to that corner of that parking lot. And they charged at him. At that point, he had no choice. He had to shoot to stop that dual threat charging right at him. And he waited as long as he could. Under these circumstances, he acted reasonably. It's not a situation any of us would want to ever be in. But under these circumstances, with these 2 guys charging right at him, he acted reasonably. He did not have a choice. And if they didn't keep attacking him, nobody would have gotten shot. You know, and they're still attacking him. The prosecution, instead of recognizing what is plain as day to everyone else, that Stephen was acting under fear, the prosecutor is trying to sell you this bill of goods that he premeditated, that he was retaliating, that he's an assassin on a rampage, none of which is consistent with the facts. It's frankly laughable to try and claim that Stephen is an assassin, that he was on a rampage. The rampage were these Delta Chis who chased these kids down into that parking lot. That was the rampage. Remember, any doubt in this case goes to Stephen. That's the law. That's what beyond a reasonable doubt means. Any doubt as you evaluate this evidence goes to Stephen. And there is no doubt that Stephen was scared out of his mind, not out for vengeance. That doesn't make any sense. And do you just think about what would happen if any of these Delta Chis, as drunk as they were, had their hands on a gun? Would have been a lot worse. Now, when you look at all the evidence in this case, evaluate all this evidence through the eyes of Stephen at that moment that he's under attack, there is no doubt whatsoever that he's innocent of all of these charges. And we expect you to find the same.
Thank you, Mr. McAllen.